My name is Jules. I am 58 and HIV positive. I tested in 1994, so I have technically been living with HIV for 20 years. My family relationships as it relates to my HIV status and well, I guess we can start with coming out. My father was absent my whole life, so it was really all about my mother. I have no siblings. I'm the only child. So my family relationships, it's strictly my mother and myself.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn, born and raised in Sheepshead Bay. I was living at home when I came out at 17. I ultimately tested positive in '94. It came as no surprise. I tried to get that across to my mother that I was going to get tested and that she should be prepared because I was prepared, that this was the reality of my life, this was the reality of the people that I had been involved with and certainly been intimate with. And while I never discussed my promiscuous history back in the day, I think she had a sense that when I was going out and dragging in, you know, at 10 o'clock the next morning, she knew I was catting around. So I don't think any of that was a surprise to her. But we certainly did discuss my relationships, and she was well aware of the illness and what was going on. When I announced that I was going to get tested, then immediately the phone rang. It's like, well, and so I made no bones about it. There was no soft pedaling it, and there was no postponing it. I told her at once, and in spite of trying to prepare her for it, she was not. I could see the shudder. I could literally see, you know, the shake when I said, yes, the results came back and I'm HIV positive. There's, I don't think, anything that can prepare a parent for learning that, especially about an only child, certainly any child, but there's always a special dynamic between a mother and her only son. It's a very special relationship that we had, and it was very up and down, it was very contentious, it was very argumentative, but she was always supportive of my life. She was always supportive, I think, because she appreciated my honesty. She appreciated my forthrightness about who I was and what my life was and what my life meant. Much to be grateful for in that respect.
Smile, baby.
What to say about the early days? It's really hard to get across the nature of our confusion about the very early days when people really started dying in great numbers, and people often said, we just can't have another memorial service, I just can't take another funeral. When it got to that point, I think there's a lot said about that. There's a lot written about that. There's plays about it, there's books about it, there's history. There's a lot of talk about that, about the widespread illness and death. But the early days when people died of things that just seemed so out of the blue and so fast, that was the strangest and I think the hardest part for me to communicate to people what that was like. From 80, 81, 82, when we didn't know what this was, we just knew that people who were young and healthy and vibrant, and sometimes these extraordinarily beautiful men, it was very, very common to talk about this guy or that guy who was so hot and so strong and so beautiful and so fantastic is dead, is just dead. And Those are the early days, that for me. And that's the strangest time. That's the hardest time to wrap your head around. Even in light of what we know now, all the things we've learned in the intervening years, it doesn't do anything for me about the way I know that I felt in those very early days when we just were so confused. And it was an element of denial as well. We didn't want it to be true. We didn't want it to be because we were passing it from one to another. We didn't want this to be a virus that we couldn't go get a shot for. We couldn't go to the clinic and take a week's worth of pills for. We just didn't want to believe that this could possibly be happening, that this could possibly be true. That's the hard part for me of what I think of as the early days, the very early days.
The world's a mess. Which we all know.
Look at that.
But
You guys are cool.
much beauty, art, music, theater, everything. Beauty in this world. Only reason to live. So, today we forget about it.
My doctor said the nicest thing to me ever. He said, "You have chosen not just to survive, but to thrive." That's exactly what he said to me. It was about the nicest compliment that anybody could have given me in relation to how HIV has changed my life, how it affects my life today. And it has given me the incentive to keep it together at all times. It is my responsibility to make the absolute most, the absolute best out of my life. Because without getting too new agey about it, everybody that didn't get the chance is seeing the world through my eyes. And it's very important to me to give that to them, to give that to their memories, their personalities, their love that lives in me. That is my gift to them.